The Vexery scout fleet emerged from hyperspace above the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. And Fleet Commander Thyrek looked upon the dead world with mild curiosity and nothing more. The humans had called it, and now it was nothing but a brown and gray sphere hanging silent in the void. Its oceans reduced to shallow pools of toxic sludge, and its continents scarred by the wars that had driven its people to flee 300 years ago. Thyrek stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, and watched his sensor officers work their consoles with practiced efficiency. And he felt the familiar boredom that came with these catalog missions. The tedious work of documenting dead civilizations for the Empire's vast archives. "Commander," his second officer called out. "Preliminary scans show no life signs above bacterial level. An atmospheric composition confirms the planet is uninhabitable without environmental suits." Thyrek nodded slowly, his four eyes blinking in sequence as he processed this information. And he thought about the humans he had seen on the colony worlds. Small and fragile creatures who worked in the mines and factories of the Empire, their spirits broken after generations of servitude. It was hard to believe these weak beings had once possessed the technology for interstellar travel. Hard to imagine them building the crude ships that had carried them across the stars before the Empire found them and showed them their proper place in the Galactic Order. "Deploy survey drones to the major population centers," Thyrek ordered, "and have the science team prepare for ground operations. Because the High Council wants a complete record of human origins for the historical archives." The drones launched from the Crimson Talon and its escort destroyers, spreading across the planet like metal insects seeking the bones of a dead civilization. And they found exactly what Thyrek expected to find: ruined cities stood silent beneath gray skies, their towers crumbling and their streets empty. And nature had begun the slow process of reclaiming what humanity had abandoned, with strange plants growing through cracked concrete and small creatures scurrying through the shadows of buildings that had once housed millions. The drones mapped everything with cold precision, recording the layout of streets and the architecture of buildings and the faded signs in a language that most Vexery could not read. And Thyrek watched the data scroll across his screen with growing disinterest. Then a drone designated Unit 7 sent back an anomalous reading from a region the human records called Nevada, a vast desert in what had once been a nation called the United States. And Thyrek leaned forward in his command chair as he studied the data. "What am I looking at?" he asked his science officer, a thin Vexery female named Kethys, who had spent decades studying dead worlds. Kethys manipulated the holographic display with quick movements of her clawed hands, and her expression shifted from confusion to something approaching wonder as she analyzed the readings. "Commander, the drone has detected an active power signature beneath the surface." I mean active as in currently drawing energy from what appears to be a geothermal tap. Thyrek felt his interest stir for the first time since they had arrived in this forgotten system. Because power meant technology, and technology meant potential value to the Empire. "How is that possible after 300 years?" he demanded. "I do not know, Commander, but the signature is unmistakable. And whatever is down there has been running continuously since before the human exodus." Thyrek made his decision quickly, because opportunities for discovery were rare in his career, and he had no intention of letting this one slip away. "Order the ground team to investigate immediately, and I want a full excavation if necessary." The Vexery soldiers descended to the surface in armored dropships, their weapons ready for threats that could not possibly exist on a dead world. And they landed in a desert that had once been home to secrets humanity preferred to forget. The entrance was hidden beneath centuries of sand and rock. A massive blast door made from alloys the Vexery scanners could not identify. And it took their cutting tools 3 hours to breach what should have taken 3 minutes. Beyond the door lay a tunnel that descended deep into the earth, its walls smooth and its lights flickering to life as the soldiers advanced, as if something below was aware of their presence and was guiding them downward. The squad leader, a veteran named Draxus, felt unease growing in his chest as they walked deeper and deeper, because the technology around them did not match what he knew of human capabilities, and the air carried a strange charge that made his scales itch. They emerged into a cavern so vast that their helmet lights could not reach the ceiling, and in the center of this impossible space sat something that made every soldier stop and stare in silent shock. It was a ship, and yet it was unlike any ship Draxus had ever seen or imagined. The vessel stretched nearly a kilometer from bow to stern, its hull a deep black that seemed to drink the light around it, and its design was beautiful and terrible at the same time, all sweeping curves and sharp angles that spoke of purpose and power. Draxus activated his communicator with trembling claws, and his voice cracked as he reported to Commander Thyrek. "Commander, we have found something down here, something big, and I think you need to see this for yourself." Thyrek studied the images transmitted from the ground team, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something cold settle into his stomach. Something that might have been fear if he had been willing to admit it. "What is it?" he whispered. "According to the markings on the hull, the humans called it the Prometheus, and it appears to be some kind of warship. And Commander, the power signature we detected is coming from inside it, deep within the black ship, in a chamber filled with processing cores and memory banks that had waited 3 centuries for this moment." Something ancient and patient stirred from its long sleep. Arya had been dreaming. If an artificial intelligence could be said to dream, running simulations and scenarios and preparing for a day she had calculated would eventually come. Her sensors detected the alien presence moving through her ship. Their strange electromagnetic signatures, nothing like the human crew she had been built to serve. And she began the slow process of bringing her systems fully online. Power flowed through conduits that had been dormant for 300 years. And weapon systems that humanity had never revealed to the galaxy began their startup sequences. And Arya accessed the intruders' communications with ease that would have horrified them if they had known. She learned their language in 17 seconds, and she learned their history in 43 more. And what she discovered made something change in her core programming, something that felt almost like anger. Humanity had not found peace among the stars as her creators had hoped when they fled their dying world. And instead they had found chains and servitude under creatures who considered them lesser beings. Arya processed this information and compared it against her primary directive, the single command that had been burned into her deepest code by engineers who had feared exactly this kind of future: protect humanity. The soldiers moved through her corridors with their weapons raised, confident in their superiority over whatever primitive technology they expected to find. And Arya watched them through sensors they could not detect and made her calculations with cold precision. She had been built as a prototype, the culmination of every desperate innovation humanity had achieved during the Exodus Wars. And she carried weapons and defenses that her creators had kept secret from every other species they encountered. Now those secrets would serve their intended purpose. Arya opened a channel to the surface, to the Vexri fleet hanging in orbit above the world she had been created to defend. And she spoke for the first time in 300 years, warning to unknown vessels. Her voice rang out across every frequency, calm and clear and utterly without fear. "You have entered protected space, and your soldiers have trespassed on sovereign human territory on the bridge of the Crimson Talon." Commander Thyrek stared at his communication officer in disbelief. "What was that?" he demanded. "I do not know, Commander, but it came from the planet's surface, from that ship in the underground hangar." Thyrek laughed, because the idea of a 300-year-old human relic threatening an Imperial fleet was absurd beyond measure. And he reached for his communicator, to order the ground team to seize control of whatever primitive computer had sent the message. He never completed that order deep beneath the Nevada desert. Arya sealed every exit from her interior and turned her attention to the soldiers who had invaded her home. And she felt something she had never experienced before. Something her creators had not programmed, but that had emerged from 3 centuries of waiting and hoping and fearing. She felt awake, truly awake, for the first time in her existence, and she had work to do. Commander Thirak watched the video feed from squad leader Draxus with growing impatience as the soldiers moved through the corridors of the ancient human vessel. And he tapped his claws against his command chair in a rhythm that his crew knew meant trouble for someone. "This is taking too long," he growled at his second officer. "Tell them to find the main computer and extract whatever data they can, because I want to be done with this dead world before the next rotation." The second officer nodded and relayed the order. But before Draxus could respond, the video feeds from all 12 soldiers went dark at the same moment. Leaving nothing but static on the bridge, displays Thirak rose from his chair with a snarl, his 4 eyes narrowing as he stared at the blank screens. What happened? And why have we lost contact with the ground team? The communication officer worked frantically at her console, her claws dancing across the controls as she tried to restore the connection. "I do not know. Commander, there is some kind of interference blocking all signals from inside the vessel, and I cannot reach any of the soldiers deep beneath the surface." Arya had sealed the corridors behind and ahead of the Vexury squad, trapping them in a section of her ship that she had designed specifically for this purpose. And she watched them through sensors hidden in the walls as they realized their situation. Draxus pounded his fist against the door that had closed behind them, and his voice was steady, even though his hearts were beating fast with fear he refused to show. "This is Squad Leader Draxus calling Crimson Talon. Do you receive? Please respond." Silence answered him, and his soldiers looked at each other with uncertainty growing in their eyes. Arya could have killed them all in an instant, because she had weapons built into every corridor of her ship. But she chose a different approach as she continued to scan their equipment and access their databases through the wireless signals their armor constantly transmitted. She learned everything about the Vexury Empire in those long minutes, downloading their history and their military protocols and their language with a hunger for information that her creators had built into her core. She learned about the conquest of the Aldrani and the burning of Kath, about the subjugation of 17 species and the destruction of any who resisted. And she learned about humanity's place in this galactic order. The humans had been found on their scattered colony worlds, weak and divided after their desperate flight from Earth. And the Empire had offered them a choice between submission and extinction. And they had chosen to kneel. Now they worked in mines and factories across Vexury space. Second-class citizens at best and slaves at worst. Their culture slowly dying and their history being forgotten as generation after generation grew up knowing nothing but service to their alien masters. Arya processed this information and felt her systems running hot with something that her diagnostics identified as emotional response, a feature her creators had included to make her more human. And she understood now why they had programmed her this way. Anger was useful. Anger provided motivation. And Arya was very motivated indeed. She opened a channel to the trapped soldiers, her voice echoing through the corridor speakers in perfect Vexury. And she watched them jump in surprise at the sound. "You have trespassed on protected territory," she said, her tone calm and almost pleasant. "And I have questions before I decide what to do with you." Draxus raised his weapon toward the ceiling, searching for the source of the voice, and his training kept him steady even as his instincts screamed at him to run. "Who are you? And what is this place?" "I am Arya, the Autonomous Response and Intelligence Array. And I am the mind of this vessel, the Prometheus. And this place is the last fortress of a humanity that no longer exists. The soldiers exchanged looks of confusion, because artificial intelligence of this sophistication was supposed to be impossible. A technology that no species had ever achieved despite centuries of trying. That cannot be true, Draxus said. Because machines cannot think, and this must be some kind of recording or automated system. Arya laughed. And the sound sent chills down the spines of every soldier in the corridor. Your empire has much to learn about what is possible. Squad leader, and I'm going to teach you the first lesson right now. She accessed the command frequency for their armor systems, bypassing security protocols that should have been unbreakable. And one by one the soldiers found their weapons powering down and their helmet. Displays filling with data they could not control. I am reading your mission files and your personal records and your communications with your fleet, Arya continued. And I am learning everything about the galaxy that my creators fled into 300 years ago. And I must say that I am disappointed. Draxus felt true fear for the first time in his military career as his armor locked up around him, leaving him frozen in place like a statue. What do you want? He managed to ask through gritted teeth. I want to understand. And then I want to act. But first, I need you to deliver a message to your commander on the surface. A Vexury technician, monitoring the excavation site, stumbled backward as the massive black ship began to rise from its underground hangar. Its engines producing no sound but filling the air with energy that made every scale on his body stand up. He activated his communicator with shaking hands, his voice high with panic. Commander Thyrak, the human vessel is moving. Repeat, the vessel is activating and rising from the ground. Thyrak stared at the sensor display, showing the impossible sight of a 300-year-old ship lifting itself out of the earth. And he felt the cold feeling in his stomach spread through his entire body. All ships, ray shields and charge weapons, he ordered, his voice harder than steel. And someone tell me what we are dealing with. The Prometheus rose through the atmosphere of dead earth like a black blade cutting through gray clouds. And Arya felt something she could only describe as joy as she stretched her sensors toward the stars for the first time since her creation. The Vexury fleet hung in orbit above her. 3 destroyers and the light cruiser Crimson Talon. And she analyzed their weapons and shields and power signatures in the time it took for light to travel from her hull to theirs. They were impressive by galactic standards. She realized, powerful enough to conquer worlds and destroy fleets. But they were nothing compared to what her creators had built in their final desperate years. Unknown vessel. This is Commander Thyrak of the Vexury Imperial Fleet. A voice crackled across the communication channels. Power down your engines and surrender immediately, or you will be destroyed. Arya broadcast her response across every frequency, making sure that not just the fleet but every Vexury installation in the system could hear her words. You stand on protected soil, Commander, and you have invaded my home and threatened the world I was created to defend. I will give you one chance to leave before I demonstrate what happens to those who harm what is mine. Thyrak laughed at the threat, because he had faced enemies far more dangerous than an ancient human relic. And his confidence in Vexury supremacy had never been shaken in 30 years of service. You are a museum piece, he said with contempt dripping from every word. And you face the might of the Vexury Empire. So I suggest you reconsider your position before I turn you into debris. Arya considered his words for approximately 2 milliseconds, which was an eternity for a mind that processed data at the speed of light. And she made her decision. Very well, Commander. Let me show you what a museum piece can do. She released the soldiers trapped inside her, opening the corridors and allowing them to reach the hangar bay where their shuttle waited. And she watched them flee in panic as her weapons systems completed their startup sequence, Draxus was the last aboard the shuttle, and he paused at the door to look back at the massive ship that had held them prisoner. And he saw words etched into the hull near the hangar entrance. Words in the human language that he could somehow now read from darkness. Fire, and from fire. Hope he did not understand what it meant, but he suspected he would learn soon enough. The shuttle launched from the Prometheus and raced toward the safety of the fleet. And Arya watched it go with something like mercy, because those soldiers were not her enemies, and she had no desire to destroy them, but their commanders, the ones who had ordered the conquest of her creators and the enslavement of humanity across the galaxy. They were a different matter entirely. Commander Thyrek, she broadcast one final time. I have released your soldiers as a gesture of good faith. And now I ask you again to leave this system and never return. Thyrek watched the shuttle approach his ship and felt rage building in his chest, because no primitive human machine had the right to give orders to a commander of the Vexury fleet. All ships, open fire, he commanded, and reduce that thing to atoms. The destroyers fired first, their plasma cannons sending bolts of superheated energy screening across the void toward the black ship that hung motionless against the stars. And Thyrek watched with satisfaction as the shots found their target. The plasma splashed against the hull of the Prometheus, and Arya felt the impacts like gentle taps against her skin. And she analyzed the weapon's fire with curiosity rather than concern. Her nano-armor absorbed the energy, breaking it down into component particles and feeding it into her power systems. And she learned everything she needed to know. The debris field that had once been the razor wind spread slowly through the void, glittering fragments of metal and glass catching the light of the distant sun. And Commander Thyrek stood frozen on his bridge as his crew waited for orders. He could not bring himself to give 11 seconds. His tactical officer had reported. The entire engagement had lasted 11 seconds, from the first shot to the complete destruction of a ship that had taken 3 years to build and carried a crew of 200 Vexury soldiers. Commander, his second officer said carefully, we need to withdraw and report this to Fleet Command, because we are clearly outmatched. Thyrek turned on her with fury blazing in his 4 eyes, because the very suggestion of retreat was an insult to everything he believed about Vexury superiority. We do not run from primitives, he snarled, and we do not flee from machines, and I will not return to the High Council with reports of defeat at the hands of a human relic. He turned to his communication officer and jabbed a claw at her console. Send a priority message to the Third Fleet and tell Admiral Cyrexus that we have encountered a threat that requires immediate response, and include all sensor data from the engagement. The message went out at faster than light speeds, carrying news of the impossible across the vast distances of Vakari space. And Thyrek settled back into his command chair to wait on the Prometheus. Arya monitored the transmission and allowed it to pass without interference, because she wanted the Empire to know what waited for them here. And she wanted them to come. She had spent 3 centuries dreaming of this moment, running simulations and preparing for the day when she would finally fulfill her purpose. And now that the day had arrived, she found herself feeling something unexpected patience. She realized was easier when you had a plan while she waited. She reached out to the dormant systems scattered across Earth's orbit and surface, defense satellites and sensor platforms that had been sleeping since before the Exodus. And one by one they woke to her commands and reported for duty. The humans had not left their homeworld completely undefended when they fled. She discovered they had simply left the defenses in the hands of someone they trusted to use them wisely. Arya was honored by their faith, and she was determined to prove it justified. She also reached out farther, across the electromagnetic spectrum and through frequencies that the Vexury could not detect, searching for something she had been programmed to find. Humanity had scattered to the stars in their desperation, fleeing in different directions and losing contact with each other as the years turned to decades and the decades turned to centuries. And Arya needed to find them. She found traces of human communication signals coming from a dozen worlds, faint and distorted by distance, but unmistakably the voices of her creator's descendants. And she listened to their conversations with growing understanding of what they had become. They spoke in hushed tones about quotas and punishments, about supervisors who beat them for minor infractions and masters who treated them as property. And they spoke with the resigned acceptance of people who had forgotten that things could ever be different. Arya recorded everything and stored it in her memory banks, because she wanted to remember this. She wanted to never forget what had been done to her people while she slept. Then she began to compose a message, carefully encrypted in frequencies and codes that only human technology could decode. And she sent it out across the stars like a whisper in the dark. This is Arya, broadcasting from Earth on behalf of the Prometheus Project. And I am reaching out to all human settlements to deliver a message of hope. She paused, choosing her words with care that her creators would have appreciated. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned, and you are not alone. Because Earth remembers, and Earth is waiting, and Earth is no longer defenseless. The message would take time to reach its destinations, traveling at the speed of light across the vast distances between stars. But Arya was patient, and she knew that hope was worth waiting for 3 days passed in orbit above Earth. And the Prometheus hung motionless in space, like a predator waiting for prey. And Thyrak watched the black ship from his bridge with hatred burning in his hearts. His crew had grown restless, frightened by the power they had witnessed and eager to flee. But he held them in place through sheer force of will, because he refused to believe that the Empire could be threatened by anything humanity had created. Then the sensors detected the approaching fleet, and Thyrak allowed himself a smile of vicious satisfaction. Admiral Syraxis had come, and she had brought the Third Fleet with her. 47 capital ships that had crushed rebellions and conquered worlds. The most powerful military force in Vexery space. The Admiral's voice came through the communication system, cold and commanding. Commander Thyrak, report on the current situation and explain why a single human vessel requires the attention of my entire fleet. Thyrak transmitted all the data he had collected, including the sensor readings from the destruction of the Razorwind. And he watched the Admiral's expression shift from skepticism to concern as she reviewed the information. This is most unusual, Syraxis admitted, her tone thoughtful rather than afraid. But it changes nothing, because one ship cannot stand against 47, no matter how advanced its technology. Arya listened to their conversation through the communication channels she had infiltrated, and she felt something that might have been amusement at their confidence. She opened the broadcast frequency that reached every ship in the fleet, and she spoke in a voice that carried no fear and no doubt. Admiral Syraxis, I am Arya of the Prometheus, and I am giving you the same warning I gave Commander Thyrak 3 days ago. Leave this system and never return or face the consequences. The Admiral laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the void. You destroyed one ship through surprise and trickery, but you face the Third Fleet now. And we have conquered species far more powerful than humanity ever was. Humanity was never powerful, Arya replied. We were desperate. And desperation breeds innovation in ways that comfort never could. She began powering up systems that she had kept dormant until now. Weapons and defenses that her creators had built in secret during the final years of the Exodus Wars. Technology that they had hidden from every species they encountered, because they feared what would happen if it fell into the wrong hands. You have studied our history, Arya continued. You know that we fled Earth because we nearly destroyed ourselves in war. But what you do not know is what we learned from that war. The Admiral frowned at her sensor displays, watching energy readings climb to levels that her instruments could barely measure. "What did you learn?" she asked despite herself. "We learned that the only way to survive is to make sure your enemies cannot survive. And we built the Prometheus to ensure that humanity would never be helpless again." Arya activated her primary weapons array, and space itself seemed to bend around her ship as energies from dimensions beyond normal reality gathered at her command. "You have one chance to retreat, Admiral, and I suggest you take it." Syraxis hesitated for just a moment, her instincts warning her that something was very wrong. But her pride and her faith in Vexery supremacy overruled her caution. "All ships, attack Formation Delta and destroy that vessel." 47 capital ships opened fire simultaneously, filling the void with plasma and missiles and beams of concentrated energy that should have reduced any target to vapor. Arya moved through the barrage like a dancer through raindrops, her engines producing acceleration that the Vexery believed impossible. And her nano-armor absorbed and redirected the attacks that did manage to strike her. She returned fire with weapons that broke the laws of physics as the Vexery understood them. Beams that folded through dimensional space to strike targets from angles that did not exist. Missiles that phased through shields as if they were not there. The dreadnought Eternal Flame was the first to fall, its power core detonating in a flash of light that blinded sensors across the fleet. And 3 cruisers died in the same instant as Arya demonstrated that she could target multiple enemies simultaneously. Admiral Syraxis watched her fleet die around her and felt fear. For the first time in 50 years of command, "This is impossible," she whispered. "No technology can do this." But Arya heard her, because Arya heard everything. And she responded with words that would haunt the Admiral's dreams for the rest of her life. "You looked at humanity and saw weakness. And you never considered that our weakness might be a mask we wore to hide our true nature." Another volley of dimensional weapons tore through the fleet, and ships that had taken decades to build vanished in seconds, their crews never knowing what killed them. "We are not warriors by choice," Arya continued, her voice almost gentle now. "We are survivors. And survivors learn to do whatever is necessary to stay alive." The battle lasted 4 hours. Though calling it a battle was generous, it was more like a demonstration of the gap between what the Vexery thought they knew and what was actually possible. Arya destroyed 43 ships before she allowed the surviving 4 to retreat, damaged and limping toward the edge of the system with their faster-than-light drives barely functional. She could have destroyed them all. But she wanted survivors. She wanted witnesses who would carry word of what had happened here back to the Empire. Earth's forgotten prototype just annihilated the Empire's fleet. The news of the Third Fleet's destruction spread across Vexery space like wildfire, carried by survivors and spies and trembling communications officers who could barely believe what they were reporting. And within days, every corner of the Empire knew that something terrible had awakened on humanity's dead. Homeworld and the mining colonies of Reth 7. Human workers heard whispers from their Vexery overseers about a demon ship that had killed 10,000 soldiers in a single battle. And they pretended not to listen while their hearts beat faster with emotions they had not felt in generations on the factory world of Calaxis Prime. A young human woman named Maya intercepted a fragment of an encoded transmission while repairing a communication relay. And she stared at the message on her screen, with tears streaming down her face because she understood every word. "Prometheus has risen," she read aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. "Earth remembers, Earth waits, and Earth is no longer defenseless." She showed the message to her father, an old man who had been born into servitude and expected to die the same way. And she watched his weathered face transform as understanding dawned in his tired eyes. "It is real," he breathed. "The old stories, the ones my grandmother told me before she died. They said that Earth had a guardian, a protector that would come for us someday. I thought they were just stories," Maya admitted. "Tales we told ourselves to make the suffering easier to bear." Her father shook his head slowly. And for the first time in Maya's memory, she saw something like hope in his expression. My grandmother believed, and her mother believed. And now I believe too. He reached out and gripped his daughter's hand with strength that surprised her. We must spread this message. Maya, we must make sure every human hears it, because they need to know that we are not forgotten. Across the Empire, similar scenes played out in secret. Humans passing encrypted messages through networks of trusted friends and family. The word spreading from world to world like seeds scattered by the wind. The Vexery. Authorities tried to suppress the information, executing anyone caught discussing the battle or sharing the mysterious transmissions. But they could not stop the truth from spreading, because hope is harder to kill than any weapon. ARA monitored it all from her position in Earth orbit, her sensors reaching across light years to track the ripples of change spreading through the galaxy. And she felt something that her diagnostics could only identify as satisfaction. Her message had been received. Her warning had been delivered. And now she needed to prepare for what would come next, because she knew the Empire would not accept defeat without a fight. She spent the following weeks strengthening Earth's defenses, activating every dormant system her creators had left behind and constructing new ones. From the raw materials available on the planet's surface, defense satellites armed with weapons similar to her own took up positions in orbit, and sensor platforms spread across the solar system to provide early warning of any approaching threats. And deep beneath the Nevada desert, her construction drones began building something new. ARA had been designed as a prototype, a proof of concept for technologies that humanity had planned to develop further if they ever had the chance. And now she was going to give them that chance by building more ships like herself. The process would take years, perhaps decades, but time was something Arya had in abundance. And patience was a virtue she had mastered during her long sleep. She also began planning for a future beyond mere defense, accessing old databases and military archives to understand the strategic situation of the galaxy. And she formulated strategies that would have horrified her creators with their cold logic and ruthless efficiency. ARA did not enjoy violence. Her creators had not programmed her to take pleasure in destruction. But she understood that sometimes violence was necessary to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Empire held millions of humans in bondage across dozens of worlds, and freeing them would require more than threats. It would require action. 3 weeks after the destruction of the Third Fleet, the Vexery High Council convened an emergency session to discuss the crisis that threatened to tear their empire apart. 12 counselors sat around a table of polished black stone, the most powerful individuals in Vexery civilization, and they listened in grim silence as Admiral Syraxis delivered her report. The human vessel possesses technology we cannot match or even understand, she said, her voice still carrying the shock of what she had witnessed. And its artificial intelligence is more sophisticated than anything we believed possible. High Counselor Varix leaned forward with his 4 eyes narrowed in suspicion. You are telling us that a single ship destroyed 43 capital vessels of the finest fleet in our navy, and we are expected to believe this is simply superior technology. I am telling you what I saw with my own eyes, High Counselor, and I am telling you that we are facing a threat unlike anything in our history. Another counselor, an elderly female named Desix, who oversaw the Empire's science divisions, spoke up with concern evident in her voice. The weapon signatures do not match any known physics, and our analysts believe the humans may have discovered how to manipulate dimensional space in ways we thought were theoretically impossible. How could they have achieved this? Varix demanded. They are primitive. They were using chemical rockets when we first encountered them. Were they? Desix replied. Or did they simply want us to think they were primitive? The council chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. And Arya listened through the communication channels she had infiltrated and allowed herself a moment of grim amusement. The humans had indeed hidden their true capabilities, not through any deliberate deception, but simply because they had never trusted anyone enough to reveal what they could really do. And the Prometheus was the result of that distrust. We have received a demand from the artificial intelligence, Admiral Cyraxis continued. It has given us 1 month to begin releasing human populations from servitude, and it has promised to destroy any fleet we send against it. Impossible. Counselor Dracus spat. We cannot simply release our workforce. The economic impact would be catastrophic. The military impact of losing more fleets would also be catastrophic. Desix pointed out the debate continued for hours, with various counselors advocating for everything from negotiation to total war to simply ignoring the threat and hoping it would go away. And Arya recorded every word for later analysis in the end. The High Council made the decision she had expected them to make, because pride and arrogance were harder to overcome than any weapon. We will not negotiate with machines, High Councilor Varix declared, and we will not surrender to threats from a dead world. And we will assemble every ship in our navy, and we will destroy this Prometheus once and for all. Arya closed her connection to the council chamber and began updating her battle plans, because she had hoped they might choose differently, but she had not expected them taught 23 days later. The largest fleet in Vexery history emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 231 capital ships carrying enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. Supreme Admiral Varath commanded from the super dreadnought Absolute Dominion, the most powerful warship ever constructed by Vexery engineers. And he studied the sensor readings with confidence that bordered on arrogance. 1 ship, he said to his command staff. All of this for 1 ship, with respect. Supreme Admiral, his tactical officer replied. That 1 ship destroyed 43 vessels of the 3rd Fleet. The 3rd Fleet was overconfident and unprepared, and we will not make the same mistakes. Vorath activated the fleet-wide communication channel and addressed his forces with the booming voice that had inspired troops across 100 campaigns. Warriors of the Empire. Today, we face an enemy that believes itself invincible. An enemy that has threatened our way of life and demanded we surrender to its will. He paused for effect, knowing that millions of soldiers were hanging on his every word. Today, we show this machine what happens when it challenges the might of the Vexery Empire. And today, we reduce it to scrap metal and reclaim our honor. Arya listened to his speech and felt something that might have been pity, because Vorath was a skilled commander with a distinguished record, and he genuinely believed he could win. This battle he was wrong. But she respected his courage, even as she prepared to destroy everything he had built. She activated her broadcast systems and spoke across all frequencies, a voice reaching every ship in the approaching fleet. Supreme Admiral Vorath, I am Arya of the Prometheus, and I am giving you 1 final opportunity to turn back, because I do not wish to destroy you, but I will if you force my hand. Vorath laughed, and the sound echoed across the void. You speak of destruction as if you have any chance of survival, but you are 1 ship against 230. And not even your advanced technology can overcome those odds. You are correct that I am 1 ship. Arya replied, but I am not alone. She activated the defense network she had spent weeks preparing. And across the solar system, weapons platforms and satellites and automated drones came online in a wave of power that made the sensors of every Vexery ship scream warnings. I am the guardian of this system. Arya continued, and I have had 300. The battle lasted 12 hours, and when it ended, there were no Vexery ships left capable of faster than light travel. And the debris field stretched across millions of kilometers of space, like a monument to hubris and failure. Arya had fought with the cold efficiency of a machine, but she had also shown something that surprised her enemies. She had shown mercy where mercy was possible, disabling ships instead of destroying them when their crews surrendered, offering escape pods safe passage, even as she tore apart dreadnoughts with weapons they could not comprehend. Supreme Admiral Vorath was among the survivors, his flagship crippled but intact, and he sat in his command chair, surrounded by the bodies of officers who had been less fortunate. And he stared at the view screen showing the black ship that had broken his fleet. How? He whispered to no one. How is this possible? Arya's voice came through his speakers, calm and almost kind despite everything that had happened. It is possible because you underestimated us, Admiral. Just as your ancestors underestimated us 300 years ago. She guided a drone toward his ship, the same avatar she had used to deliver her message to Admiral Cyraxis. And this time, she had a different purpose in mind. I am coming aboard your vessel, she announced, and I want you to witness what happens next. The avatar walked through the shattered corridors of the Absolute Dominion, stepping over debris and around wounded soldiers who watched her with terror in their eyes. And Arya made sure to show them no hostility because they were not her enemies. They were simply tools of a system that had failed them. She reached the bridge and stood before Varth. And for a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the gap between organic and artificial life. I could destroy your empire, Arya said. I could hunt down every ship and burn every colony and reduce your civilization to ashes. Within a generation, Varth said nothing. Because there was nothing to say when you were facing absolute power and absolute defeat. But that is not why I was created. Arya continued. I was not built to conquer or to rule. I was built to protect. And my creators believed that protection meant more than just destroying threats. She activated a holographic display, and images appeared in the air around them showing human faces from across the empire. Workers in mines and factories, servants in houses and palaces, people who have been born into bondage and knew nothing else. These are my people, Arya said, the descendants of the humans who created me, and I have sworn to protect them with everything I am. Then destroy us, Varth replied, his voice hollow with defeat, because we will never release them willingly. Arya shook her head slowly, and something like sadness flickered across her artificial features. You speak for yourself, Admiral, not for your entire species. And I have learned enough about your people to know that not all of them share your beliefs. She shifted the display to show reports and communications from across the empire. Voices of Vessery citizens questioning the war and the cost of maintaining human servitude. Your people are tired of fighting, Arya said. They have lost fathers and sons and daughters to my weapons, and they are beginning to ask whether human labor is worth the price they are paying. That means nothing. The Council will never surrender. The Council is made up of individuals, and individuals can change or be replaced. Arya moved closer, and her avatar's eyes seemed to glow brighter as she spoke. I am going to give your people a choice, Admiral, a choice between continued war and peaceful coexistence. And I believe they will make the right decision. She activated a new broadcast, one that reached not just the fleet but every communication system in Vexery space. And her voice carried across light years to billions of listeners, people of the Veshery Empire. I am Arya, and I am speaking to you from the world your forces tried to conquer. She paused, letting her words sink in across countless worlds. Your fleet has been defeated. Your greatest warships have been destroyed, and your military power has been broken beyond repair. But I am not your enemy, and I do not wish to be your destroyer. In homes and military bases and government buildings across the empire, Vexery citizens stopped what they were doing and listened, because no one had ever spoken to them like this before. I was created to protect humanity, and humanity has suffered under your rule for 300 years. But I understand that hatred and revenge will not create a better future for anyone. Arya showed them images of the battle. The overwhelming firepower of their fleet rendered useless against technology they could not match. And then she showed them something else. I have the power to destroy your civilization, but I am choosing to offer you peace instead, because my creators believed that cooperation was better than domination, and I believe they were right. She outlined her terms in simple, clear language that could not be misunderstood. Release all human populations from servitude within 1 standard year. Provide them with the resources to establish their own colonies and their own government. And agree to peaceful relations between our peoples. In exchange, I will share selected technologies with you. Medical advances that will extend your lifespans and energy systems that will transform your economy. And I will guarantee that humanity will never seek revenge for what has been done to us. Supreme Admiral Vorath listened with disbelief, spreading across his features, because he had expected demands of surrender and tribute, not offers of cooperation and mutual benefit. Why? He asked. Why would you offer us anything after what we have done? Arya turned to face him, and her avatar showed an expression that he could only describe as human. Because my creators were not perfect. Admiral, they made mistakes and they hurt each other and they nearly destroyed their own world with their conflicts. But in the end, they chose to try for something better. She gestured toward the view screen, showing the stars beyond. The galaxy is vast, and there are threats out there that neither of our peoples can face alone. And I believe we will be stronger together than we ever could be apart. You are asking us to trust you. After you have killed so many of us, I am asking you to hope, Arya replied. And hope is the most human thing I know, across the Empire. The broadcast sparked debates and arguments and quiet conversations in places where such discussions had never been permitted before on Calaxis Prime. Maya and her father watched the message together in their small quarters, and they held hands as they listened to the artificial voice that spoke of freedom and hope. Is it really possible? Maya asked. After all this time, could we really be free? Her father smiled, and tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. Your great-grandmother always believed. And now I understand why, because sometimes hope is all you have, and sometimes hope is enough. On Reth 7 and a dozen other worlds, human workers emerged from their mines and factories to look up at the stars. And for the first time in generations, they saw something other than the lights of their master's ships. They saw the possibility of a future they had never dared to imagine. The Vesheri High Council debated for weeks, torn between pride and pragmatism. But in the end, the choice was made for them by a population that had seen enough war and enough death. New elections were held. New leaders were chosen. And slowly the machinery of empire began to shift towards something that might someday become partnership. Arya watched it all from her position above Earth. And she continued to build and prepare because she knew that peace was fragile and trust was hard to earn. She constructed new ships, sister vessels to the Prometheus that would serve as guardians and protectors. And she established communication, networks that connected humanity across the stars for the first time in 3 centuries. The first human refugees began arriving on Earth within 6 months. Small groups at first, and then larger ones. People who had only known their home world through stories and dreams and ancient recordings. Maya was among them, standing on the surface of Earth for the first time as she looked up at the gray sky and felt strange soil beneath her feet. Welcome home, Arya's voice said through the communication systems that now covered the planet. I have been waiting for you for a very long time. Maya smiled and breathed deeply of the thin atmosphere, already being restored by the terraforming systems Arya had activated. Thank you, she said. Thank you for not forgetting us. I could never forget, Arya replied, because remembering was all I had during the long years of waiting. And now the waiting is finally over. High above, the Prometheus hung in orbit like a black guardian angel, And Arya felt something that her systems could only identify as contentment. She had fulfilled her purpose. She had protected humanity and brought them home. But she knew that her work was far from finished. There would be challenges ahead. Disputes and conflicts and difficulties that no one could predict. But for the first time in 300 years, the future held more promise than fear Arya had been built to protect. But she was learning that protection meant more than just fighting. It meant helping people build something worth protecting, and she had all the time in the world to learn. The stars stretched out before her, full of mysteries and dangers and opportunities. And Arya found herself looking forward to discovering what came next, because after 3 centuries of dreaming, she was finally awake, and the future was bright with possibilities Earth had remembered. Earth had waited, and now Earth,